Are you daring your bookkeeper to steal from you? You might be doing it. You don't even realize it because, believe it or not, a bookkeeper can actually destroy a business by completely draining a business's accounts and have 100 excuses as to why the money is just disappearing. A lot of business owners are completely clueless when this happens. The thing is, the business owner trusts the bookkeeper they've hired, so they would never suspect that a bookkeeper would actually do something like steal from them. But let me tell you, as somebody who had been a bookkeeper in the past, it's very tempting. In today's chair chat, I want to talk to you about the 5 biggest mistakes that I've seen business owners make in dealing with a bookkeeper. These 5 mistakes will easily cost a business money. I'm going to start with the first bookkeeping job that I had. I was 18 years old. I was fresh out of high school. My mother, who is also a bookkeeper, she was then, she still is today, she had taken a QuickBooks training course. And she had just gotten hired at this company because the previous bookkeeper left on maternity leave. My mom was called in to take care of the books while the previous bookkeeper was gone. Right away, my mom noticed that there was something kinky with the books. She did a quickie audit and she found that there was roughly $25,000 missing from the bank account, was not quite accounted for. So she called me and said, I want you to come in and I want you to restructure the books for the last 2 years. The previous bookkeeper had only been there for 9 months. And then the bookkeeper before that bookkeeper didn't know what she was doing at all. Because of these 2 bad bookkeepers, now the IRS had come knocking at this business's door, and my mom needed to focus on the audit that was coming up. Because if the audit wasn't addressed correctly, then this was going to cost the company $150,000 in penalties from the IRS. Not great, right? So my mom calls me, gives me a quickie training course, and it's basically to completely rebuild 2.5 years worth of books as quickly as I possibly can. It took me about 2 months because it was my first bookkeeping job. A lot of things that QuickBooks could do now, it couldn't do then. Like there was no online access directly into a bank because this was 1995. The internet was still new back then. I came in, I restructured the books from scratch, and I found that the bookkeeper had actually stolen something like over $40,000 in the 9 months that they had been at this business. Some of the lessons I'm going to teach you today are actually from that particular incident and the 5 mistakes that that particular business owner made that he didn't know was a mistake. He trusted the wrong person. I want to make sure that you don't do the same thing. That's the first part of the story. Now, the second part of the story is about how tempting it is to steal from a business owner. So the second part of the story comes in about 6 years later. I'm working at a flooring company and I got hired to do accounts receivable. You should have seen when I walked into the company. It was ridiculous. They didn't even have a computer for me to do the accounts receivable on. They had a typewriter. And I went, no, I'm not going to do the bookkeeping on a typewriter. The manager immediately promised he would buy me a computer. I told him, you buy me a computer, I will bring you QuickBooks. He said, great. I turned a 40-hour-a-week job into roughly 17 hours a week. The other bookkeeper handled accounts payable. She continued to work 40 hours and she continued to use a typewriter and then a computer with basically an old DOS program on it, which I never bothered to look at. I thought she was nuts for using it. But eventually what ended up happening was she had a falling out with the owner and she quit because the owner wanted her to do what I was doing. He wanted her to start using QuickBooks to do the accounts payable and the payroll. She said no. And she left. So now I was suddenly doing it. I basically revamped the system for accounts payable. I revamped the system for payroll. Next thing you know, I had the job down to about 30 hours a week, and we hired a college student to come in and do the filing and the stuff that I didn't want to deal with. So basically, now I am the full-time bookkeeper at this company. And I do consider myself a Christian. I do believe that God watches us. I'm always trying to be a good person. I strongly believe that God was watching me. So I wouldn't steal from a company. But I can tell you that business owner tempted me to steal. And there were 2 reasons that that happened. One was because he really had no clue about anything that had to do with bookkeeping. Even though he was 89 years old and even though he'd been running that business for over 50, 60 years, all he knew was that he could come grab a ledger card and the ledger card would say what the balances were that different people owed. I got him to change that. But that was not the reason. The thing that he did that tempted me to steal from him was because he once came into my office and he started talking about these poor installers and how little money they made. They were making about $50 an hour while I was making about $18 an hour. Really big difference. And he wouldn't stop talking about how bad he felt for them. I just looked at him and I said, you do realize I am the lowest paid person in this company. right? Because all the salespeople worked on commission. They made really good money. And literally, I was the lowest paid person in the company. And I knew exactly how much everybody made. When I looked at him and I said that, he just kind of was like, oh, yeah, you're a woman. Yeah. I was like, you really want to go there, do you? He starts telling me about how, well, these installers have families and I don't, and I'm single. I couldn't really argue with that. I really did not appreciate the way that he would talk to me about things. And that's the thing. A lot of business owners, they expect to know what their bank balance is. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of business owners I have found over the years will blame their bookkeeper if their bank balance is too low because they think that their bookkeeper is spending all their money. Their bookkeeper isn't spending all their money. The bookkeeper is just trying to keep a balance and make sure everything gets paid, make sure nothing gets held up. But that doesn't stop a lot of business owners from coming in and yelling at the bookkeeper as if everything is their fault. I will tell you, when that business owner would come to me with his sexist comments, it was tempting because I could have stolen from that company and he would never have known. And I'm pretty sure the other bookkeeper was stealing from him. And I'm actually going to go over one of those ways today. Let's get this started with lesson number 1. The number 1 thing that you can do to protect yourself from having a bookkeeper steal from you, whether you piss them off or not, is always open your own bank statements. I know this sounds really pathetic and really simple, but if I was your bookkeeper and I decided I wanted to steal from you, one of the easiest ways to do that is to write a check, forge the signature, write to a company that doesn't exist, write more than one check for the same thing, for the same person. There's 100 different ways you can steal through checks. And if you hand me your bank statement unopened, whether you get copies of checks or whether you actually get the original checks sent back to you, depending on your bank, I, as the stealing bookkeeper, will simply open it, find the check that has the criminal evidence on it, and destroy it. Easy peasy. I got away with it. The only way you're going to find out is if one day you start looking at your check register and you see something that you're like, what is that? And you want to look at the check and you can't find it, and you contact the bank and you order it, which can cost you a lot of money. Or if you do like what me and my mom did, which is completely recreate the books from scratch and then start to find missing checks. Basically, by you opening the bank statement yourself, you are going to discourage the bookkeeper from actually stealing through checks, because whether you look at the checks or not, she or he is going to assume that you are looking at them and they're going to look for another way to steal from you. So number 1 thing you could do, protect yourself by simply opening the bank statements. And I would honestly, seriously encourage you to flip through all of the checks, make sure you know every name on there, every amount, that it's your signature. Then, once you're okay with that, then you hand the checks and the bank statement to the bookkeeper. It goes a long way in stopping bookkeeper theft. Lesson number 2, do you have a signature stamp? If you do, never give it to your bookkeeper. It may be incredibly tempting to give it to your bookkeeper, but don't do it, because it is super tempting to take a business owner's signature stamp or write a check to yourself as the bookkeeper and just go stamp. Here's another one. Stamp. Some of my friends. Stamp, stamp, stamp. Fake company. Stamp, stamp, stamp. Do not do it. If you want to invest in a signature stamp because maybe you travel a lot and you can't be around to sign the checks all the time, never give the signature stamp to your bookkeeper. Give it to somebody else in the office who you trust, or else make them wait until you get back and sign everything yourself. Or if you have the signature stamp for yourself, just make sure you keep it locked away. Make sure that nobody else uses it. So that's mistake number 2. Easy solution. Huge mistake number 3, letting your bookkeeper be a signer on your bank account. Never, ever, ever do that. Because again, if I'm your bookkeeper and you do something that pisses me off, and I decide, F you, I'm quitting, guess what the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the bank and I'm going to empty out that bank account. Then I'm going to quit and not show up on you. You will have no idea where I went. And you can call the police, but you're not going to be happy with the results. Never, ever have your bookkeeper as a signer on your account. If you do, go down immediately and remove them. If you can't remove them, close the account, reopen a new one. Lesson number 4, when the bookkeeper tells you that they're voiding a check, ask to see the check. Or tell them that you want to void the check yourself. Make them bring you the check, voided or unvoided. If it's unvoided, yourself. If it's voided, you've seen it. The reason for that is double payday. I've seen it. Basically, a bookkeeper will write a check to a fake company, a friend, themselves, whoever, and then they will just say that they voided it and didn't. And they'll write it again. Now they've got 2 of your checks. with their name, same amount. If that was to go through twice and you were to catch it, they could just be like, oh, that's a big mistake. They're clearing that up. But in reality, it could be 2 actual checks. So you want to make sure that if they tell you they had to void the check, ask them to bring the check to you. You want to see it. Even hold on to the checks if you want and give them back to the bookkeeper with the open bank statement. Simple way to make sure that they are not double dipping into your checking account. Finally, lesson number 5, petty cash. Huge mistake. I mentioned that I was pretty sure the other bookkeeper was stealing from the owner, but I couldn't prove it. Why couldn't I prove it? Because she had a petty cash box. I believe when we found the petty cash box and we went into it, the owner was actually surprised that there was a petty cash box. I think he had known of its existence, but he didn't really think it existed anymore. And I had seen employees come in and ask for cash from the bookkeeper, and she gave it to them, and they left. But what the owner said to me when I asked him about the petty cash box and brought it to him, he said, where did the cash come from? It came from the register. She would basically take the cash from the cash register for cash sales that had happened. She would total them up and act like it was going to be included in the bank deposit, but then not deposit some of the cash and just hold on to some of the cash and make the deposit for less. She could account for every single dollar that came in, and the owner was satisfied with what came in, but not all of that money made it to the bank account. Some of it made it into the petty cash. And I will tell you this, she had a gambling problem. She was at the casino 3-4 times a week. So yeah, pretty sure some of that petty cash ended up at the casino, but I couldn't prove it because she would just refill it with cash. And my job was not to check her deposits. I didn't have anything to do with the deposits. She was strictly deposits all by herself. A very simple way to make sure that somebody is not stealing from petty cash is get rid of the petty cash box. It's far better to have a company card because every place takes a card. If they don't take a card, you need to send your employees to somewhere that does take a card, because there are very few places in this world now that is cash only. Have a credit card for those quick, easy purchases that the employees are going to do. That way you have a record, and it's a double check because they'll come back with the receipts, but you're also going to have it on your statements. Now you've got a checks and balance system in place. So ditch the petty cash and just switch to a credit card. If you don't like the idea of a credit card because maybe you're worried that your employees are going to max it out, get a prepaid credit card. Those were the things I wanted to talk to you about today. There's one more thing. About a decade ago, I had a bookkeeping blog, and there was a book that I wrote called Diary of a Bad Bookkeeper. If you want to know more ways about how to catch bookkeeping theft, I put all of the ways that I knew at that time into that book. I wrote basically a fictional story kind of based on that first job that I mentioned, and a lot of the ways that I saw that bookkeeper and then other bookkeepers throughout the years steal or mess up the books. I basically created a diary where a bookkeeper is stealing from her boss, all the different ways that she's stealing from him. They're all our diary entries. They're all fictional. And at the end of each chapter, I tell you how to stop that type of bookkeeping theft. It has been one of my best-selling books ever since I wrote it for the blog. I've been told there are a lot of spelling mistakes, so I will revamp it soon. But I've gotten the most thank you emails from that book. I've had police officers contact me. I've had business owners contact me. I've had bookkeepers contact me about that book. I even had a university professor contact me and ask if they could teach that book in their class a couple years ago. And I said, go for it. It's on Kindle. It's free if they have Kindle Unlimited. I charge very, very little for that book. If you want it, I'll put a link in the description below. If you do get it, I apologize ahead of time for the spelling errors. Like I said, I'll fix that in the future. But that's all of the ways that I know. If you read that book and you find that there are ways that you've seen bookkeepers steal or anybody steal from a company, please put that in the comments below. I would love to add it to future renditions of that book when I rewrite it. Also, if you like what I wrote, please like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. As always, I try to answer questions to comments within the first 24 hours of any video going live. If you ask me questions after the 24 hours, I will try to answer them in upcoming videos. So you might want to hit that notification bell just so that way you can talk to me in the future and make sure that I answer you as quickly as possible. See you guys in the next chair chat.